Welcome to History of the Netherlands, where we explore the events and characters that over time have transformed a swamp into an amazing modern marvel. Episode 61. First catch us, then hang us. Of the many political issues which loomed large over the Low Countries in the early 1500s, the ongoing war with Guelders was perhaps the most pressing of all. This conflict impacted all levels of society, from the ruling princes and their courtiers to the regular citizenry who faced the brunt of marauding soldiers. Throughout this podcast, we have eagerly sought not to eschew the earnest engagement of unease that the Guelders situation evoked amongst the elevated echelons of the social hierarchy in Europe, given that it was essentially a conflict between imperial and centralizing rulers, being Maximilian and his progeny, and a native-born prince, Charles of Egmont, selling himself as a resistance hero whose biggest ally in it all, the King of France, just happened to be the powerful archenemy of those same imperial rulers. Over the last few episodes, we have hopefully woven the narrative well enough that you know, by now, what a lot of the diplomatic discussion and debate would have looked like as the Guelders situation took its place on the wider playing field on which European royalty was wrangling for power. It was an issue, but it was one of many. For the towns of Holland and Brabant, which bore the brunt of Guelderian raids, tensions ran high as money was poured into defense, with citizens made to train and purchase weapons, and town armaments were either built or improved upon. Historian James P. Ward gives a fantastic summary of what kind of situation Dutch towns and cities were looking at during the context of this war as pertained to their defenses. Quote, "City defense was in the hands of the magistrates and the citizens themselves, but they were frequently warned and advised by the government about measures they needed to take. One of the dilemmas facing early 16th century architects and fortress builders was expressed by Albrecht Dürer as the need to build a fortress strong enough to be held, but not so strong that if it fell into the hands of the enemy by subterfuge, treachery, or otherwise, it could not be recovered." End quote. In the architecture of defenses, Ward goes on to argue that at this time, Dutch towns were transitioning from a medieval design to a style better suited against contemporary arms, a style that would become known as très italien, or something like that. One of the most striking examples of that in the Netherlands today is the town of Naarden, whose 17th century star-shaped fortifications are some of the best preserved in Europe. The nature of the Guelders War meant that towns never knew if or when they would become embroiled in the violence, so they had best be ready for it. In her book, The High and Puissant Princess Margaret of Austria, our dear companion in recent episodes, Marianne Andrews, wrote of the Guelders War, quote, "It was no great war in which the combatants might distinguish themselves by brilliant feats of arms, no very striking events, no decisive battle. It was simply a long, disastrous struggle, almost the nature of a civil war between near neighbours. When we hear now of a little town being surprised, probably by treachery, now of a castle besieged and taken with cruel massacre, a convent burnt to the ground, or merely a company of merchants robbed by brigand pitons and murdered if they made resistance." End quote. Different historians of the Guelders Wars have been making different comparisons of it throughout history. Contemporary monks wrote of the horrors of it, while centuries later, in 1937, it was described by Charles Oman merely as, quote, "narrow-fronted scuffles along the tops of dikes or desperate attempts to cross difficult water barriers." End quote. Unsurprisingly, after the Second World War, Charles of Egmont was imagined as a determined leader who rallied his people against seemingly insurmountable odds, which itself is still more modest than the comparison to Achilles that is inscribed upon his burial monument. For what it's worth, James Ward likens him more to Hannibal and has himself more recently compared the Guelders War in general to the wars in the Balkans in the 1990s, So it is not a simple event or series of events to pin down, and was not a conflict full of large-scale set-piece battles, but rather one defined by smaller-scale raids, lootings, kidnappings, and hostage-takings, which would have been miserable to live through for the regular citizenry of Holland, Brabant, and Utrecht. We have spent the last few episodes focusing on the high-level politics of the Low Countries as Margaret of Austria became regent following the death of her brother. In this episode, however, we want to take a more granular look at the Guelders War by zooming in on the events as they affected one city in particular, Amsterdam, during a roughly 1 year period from the end of 1507 until December 1508. Mainly, we want to try and develop a perspective of how people who were not dukes, bishops, or princesses, but rather the regular Jans and Geertjes, citizens of a small but powerful town whose lives were greatly impacted by the actions and decisions of those above them on the social hierarchy ladder of life that existed at the time. We have been on imaginative journeys through Amsterdam before, once in the 1420s, episode 22, and more recently in episode 53, as we explored the shipbuilding traditions that were, by then, well established in Amsterdam. Well, we figured there is no harm in going back some 20 years on from that most recent adventure to see what has become of our caulker and how he may have experienced a tumultuous year in Amsterdam as the Guelders War suddenly erupted on the city's doorstep. Our account of this time is mostly based on the history of Amsterdam written by city historian Jan Wagenaar, published between 1760 and 1767. Wagenaar was given unrestricted access to the city archives, and this use of primary sources means that his account is full of the vivid details you are about to live through. So kick back, relax, and transport yourself back in time to the early autumn of the 1507th year of your Lord. Your footsteps pound over the wooden planks that line the muddy path. The cold north wind batters into your face, and the sting in your old hands tells you that a storm's not far away. As you turn towards the Warmlustraat and step onto the stones cobbling the way, you can feel a flurry of anxiety amongst everybody there. That isn't so unusual these days. Not since July, when unpaid Guelderian soldiers had started marauding through the lands of nearby Utrecht. The Amsterdam Town Council's reaction to the threat of these troops had been severe, proclaiming that no resident is to travel to Utrecht on pain of forfeiting their citizenship rights due to the depredations of the Guelderians. This punishment meant losing the legal protections of the city, foregoing the freedom from tolls in Holland, which Amsterdammers had enjoyed for over 200 years, not to mention disallowance from participating in the city's guilds anymore. Soon enough, that initial proclamation became stricter, turning into a general prohibition on anyone coming or going from Amsterdam. The order reads, no one might enter or leave the city without possessing a token from an official appointed by the city for this purpose, stationed at the home of the widow of the late Jacob Willemzoon in the Kerkstraat. As you hurry up the street, you pass the Oude Kerk, where Warmlustraat becomes Kerkstraat. As you walk past that building where those tokens are issued, you remember how all of these regulations had scuttled your hopes to travel to Amersfoort a few weeks ago. Your wife had been ill, and in your desperation to help her recover, you wanted to make a pilgrimage to Amersfoort to pray to the miraculous statuette of Mary at the Church of Our Lady, which is said to have healing properties. This pilgrimage you had to forsake, as the official had not deemed your reason as worthy enough. You cursed Charles of Egmont again under your breath as you remember how devastated you've been, thinking your wife was going to die. Luckily, she has recovered regardless, which seems in itself a miracle. Your contempt for Egmont and his marauding brigands has not abated since. The situation with Guelders has escalated further since then. At the end of August, on the eve of St. Augustine's Day, the damned Guelderians have burned down Bodegraven, a village south of Amsterdam, and now, some weeks later, the the town council has issued an order that reads, all residents capable of bearing arms to hold themselves ready to march out against the enemy at a moment's notice. For this, all tradesmen and artisans are to be paid a staufer, and should they actually march out, 5 staufers per day. That includes you. You might be getting old, but you are still strong after years of manual labor, hammering sphagnum into ships to waterproof them, and you are definitely still able to bear arms. You struggle to fall asleep at night, as you are always on edge, waiting to hear the clattering of bells or the blaring of trumpets calling you to fight against the enemy. Even though you have come here from Flanders back in your youth, Amsterdam has become home. Some years ago, you managed to become a porter, a citizen, by marrying Treintje, the daughter of a shipbuilder. Together you started a family. You are no longer just an inwoner, a resident, but now a member of the city, a part of its varied and colourful fabric. You receive the rights to join a guild. Not that there is one for caulkers, mind you. And you could and did move into a nicer part of town. It gave you other rights, most notably that not to have to pay tolls for goods shipped in Holland, which has allowed you to expand your business into moving specialized ship parts around to different shipyards, giving you a comfortable yet physical working life. Your children are learning your skills and the business, and they will be able to take it over in the future. All things considered, Amsterdam and her harbour have treated you very well over the last 2 decades or so, and you will eagerly do your duty to defend them. But for now, it's wharfy time, and you trot on into the wind, heading out a gate and towards the Lestage, an industrial area to the east of the city just outside the stone walls, where you've got caulking to do. The much dreaded call to arms hasn't come, and life has continued on with at least a semblance of normalcy. The dark, cold months of winter set in. The hostilities between Holland and Guelders has been ongoing for a few years now, and the steps the city council has chosen to take in the face of this war over the past few winters has made life increasingly difficult for those of you who work in the Lestage. In the winter months, up to 200 ships would typically lay moored in the Oude Waal, the harbour on the north side of the Lestage, so that they could be repaired, caulked and refitted for their journeys in the spring and summer. To do that work, all sorts of raw materials are needed, like planks, pitch, tar, hemp, and firewood, all of which is highly flammable. When winter sets in, the water in the harbour was wont to freeze, creating a vulnerability in the city's defences. Enemy troops could simply cross the ice into the Lestage and sneak up to the city walls. From there, they could quite easily put the city to siege or even burn the whole Lestage to the ground, which would be extremely hazardous to the city proper. Amsterdam has walls around its east, south, and west sides, but the north side of the town, which faces the water, is more open, being the primary access to the waterways. It is less defendable. As such, for the previous 3 years, the city council has maintained the order that in the winter months, the citizens who live nearby the Eye, Amsterdam's harbour, are required to build fencing in front of their houses and woodyards. This winter, however, in addition to erecting fencing, no pitch, tar, wood, or ship tackles are allowed to be left in the Lestage. Countless ship workers and masters groan. How will anyone be able to do their winter work? Along with the city's order to remove all timber from the timber yards situated between Schreierhoek and St. Olaf's Gate, a boundary line is drawn that runs from the Paul's Brothers Monastery near the Holy Way to Bethany's Almshouse near St. Anthony's Gate. It is decided that everything on the northeast side of the line is to be demolished. The reason that the city is demolishing this section is to ensure a clear cannon shot from that part of the city walls. With all the run-to and ramshackle buildings there, cannon is useless against a stealthy attacking army that might think to use the buildings in the Lestage as cover. This affair, you realize, is going to be extremely costly for your business. With civic duty in mind, however, you go and volunteer your services to rip all the wooden structures in that part of the Lestage apart, which is a far cry from your usual work and custom there, of rather trying to keep wood together. Several weeks later, now in the 1508th year of your Lord, you learn that the authorities in towns and cities along the coast of the Zuiderzee have collectively ordered that no one is to sail eastward or westward from that sea until further public permission is granted. You and other shippers moan once more. Goods sit unshipped. Men have to be paid. Winter passes drearily and hunger lingers with many. The sun, though, does eventually get stronger. The birds in the canal begin to swoon and fight, but the tension still mounts for everybody. Much of your business is now stifled, since you can no longer move goods to the eastern regions, but you still have enough orders to fill going south to Dordrecht on the Doorvaart binnen Duinen. A lot of the shipyard work has ground to a halt, though, since the removal of wood from the timber yards, and rumours abound that the government is going to move the shipyards altogether. You and everybody else in Amsterdam wonder, how is it possible that this disastrous war with Guelders has not yet come to an end? In April, the States General is convened in Ghent, and hopes are raised that perhaps there a solution might be found to reduce the burden which everybody in Holland and Brabant is bearing. The Lord Maximilian has requested that the states grant him money so that he can pay for 10,000 more troops and 2,000 more cavalry, which will certainly be enough to keep Holland and Brabant safe from Charles of Egmont. Unfortunately, though, word returns that the States General unanimously declined to give more money to pay for the war. They said it was an issue for the House of Burgundy, not one for the general interests of the lands. You are incensed, though, as you know that one way or another, the House of Burgundy isn't the one paying for this war. It is yourself and your fellow workers and shippers in the towns of Holland whose lives have been ground to a halt because of it. We will continue our early 16th century imaginings after this very modern ad break. On the 23rd day of May, word arrives in Amsterdam that your worst fears have been realized and that two important defensive locations to the east of the city, the town of Weesp and the nearby castle at Muiden, have been captured by Charles of Egmont and his Guelderian forces. The shock is palpable across the town and the threat to Amsterdam could not be greater. The enemy is but one town away and in possession of a castle. From there, the troops from Guelders can easily make their way to the Diemerzeedijk, a raised road that leads through the otherwise impassable boggy morass. It is the only accessible land route from the south and east of Amsterdam and a path from Muiden straight towards the Lestage and the vulnerable side of the town. The tension and excitement in the city surges. Everywhere you look, everybody is in a hurry. That day, the city orders that all workers are obliged to go to the Lestage and dismantle all wooden structures, meaning everything. All goods have to be brought within the protection of the walls, and all ships have to be moved to new moorings by the Nieuwe Waal on the other side of the town. You and your grown children trudge on down and spend the whole day uncoupling beams and dragging away sacks and barrels and helping skippers with their vessels. Amongst the business owners, there is heavy discussion and discontent, and somebody mentions a petition demanding compensation from the city. You are one of the few actual citizens amongst them, and the small group there looks at you for your opinion. You do feel aggrieved that the city is just trampling over your business, encumbering your rights to commerce and trade. Upon feeling this, you then reflect that you still surprise yourself by the sense of entitlement that being an Amsterdammer has given you. At the end of the day in the Lestage, everything which is left over is set ablaze, and the smoke from the remnants of the neighborhood leaves an acrid pall over the city. The next morning, word trickles across the city that a priest has arrived at the St. Anthony's Gate, so you make your way down there, along with half the city, it would seem. The priest is bearing a message to the city of Amsterdam from Charles of Egmont, whom he calls the true Duke of Guelders. An angry murmuring spreads throughout the crowd, which has gathered to listen to what this priest has to say. The Amsterdammers couldn't give a damn about whether Charles of Egmont or Emperor Maximilian or the kid of the late King Philip calls themselves the Duke of Guelders. What everyone cares about is that this is a terrible affair for everyone's business and must cease. The priest nervously clears his throat and continues, Duke Charles demands that the town of Amsterdam surrenders peacefully to him and requires that the town council acknowledges him as their lord. There is jeering and whistling from the crowd as you see the mayors quickly conferring with one another before replying, "We swore our allegiance to King Philip, and we shall remain loyal to his children. And as you can see, the citizenry is not yet in such a predicament that they should wish to change lords." The priest looks flummoxed at this response before shaking his head and saying, "Very well, then you should give your response in writing so I can deliver it to Duke Charles." Once more, the mayors lean in to discuss this quietly between themselves before the most rotund one of them all steps forward and says, "I didn't see your message from that scoundrel in writing, and we're certainly not going to waste our paper on him. So you can kindly advise your lord that he can firmly place his request directly up his..." You don't quite catch the last word as the erupting cheers from the crowd nearest the speaker drown it out. But the mood of the onlookers is certainly buoyed as they continue to jeer the priest who trudges dejectedly out of the St. Anthony's Gate back towards Visp. The excitement of the morning gives extra drive to the citizens of Amsterdam to make sure that they are truly prepared for the enemy army, which is surely just hours away from besieging the walls. The city council issues orders that all buildings outside the St. Anthony's Gate are now to be dismantled, which include the beautiful target range of the Archers Guild. The trees which the archers would hang their targets on are to be chopped down to make sure that the enemy couldn't use them as cover, and the Shoemakers Guild is engaged to carry all the fallen trees inside the gates. Much like the nearby Lestage, these remnants too are burned to the ground. There are also further proclamations that nobody should be taking any gold or silver outside of the city, and that all merchants from Amsterdam who had gone to markets in Antwerp are to return as soon as possible. Messengers are sent from the city. The time for battle is fast approaching. The next morning, you, along with every other able-bodied man, gather to receive orders from the city's militia. You leave through the St. Anthony's Gate and begin to march along the road on the dike towards Diemen. After a time and a certain distance outside of Amsterdam, you see the waters of Het Ei in the distance, glistening in the early morning sun. There is another sight, though. You cannot mistake the smoke that rises from the horizon as being anything other than a herald of destruction and doom. It tells you that Charles of Egmont has taken the village of Diemen. Diemen is on fire. Everyone puts an extra step in their stride when they see the distant sight, as if you all make a silent agreement to get there quicker. The body of men squeezes onto the dike that runs all the way to Mouden, with the waters of the Eye lapping the left and the bog surrounding the Diemermeer Lake to the right. At the narrowest point of the dike, at a hamlet called Apersloot, a temporary fort has been hastily constructed. There, you are told, you Amsterdammers will halt the Guelderians. As you arrive at the fort, you scan the low-lying marshy field called the Papenveld, and then the adjacent waters of the Diemermeer. You see several ships anchored there, part of a defensive ring. The crowd of men gathered on your side is not very organized, and many, like you, start milling aimlessly around. Looking back towards the city, you notice, like you, planning an escape route. A militia captain in glistening attire rides up to you on a horse, points down and makes a grand sweeping motion that snares you and a few others in your vicinity. The captain points down to the water and tells you all to get on a boat, indicating a series of small tenders bobbing near the soggy bank. You are rowed out to float within a barricade, protecting the fortification alongside other small boats full of men, as well as the larger ships. You are armed with a wooden pike and protected by a steel helmet and breastplate that you took as payment many years ago. It fit you better back then, and as you feel its pinch, you can also feel your heart pounding against it. When the enemy arrives, you hear them before you see them. They come streaming, screaming, and shouting across the Papenveld, the ground that runs adjacent to the dike. Some take cover in and behind the little huts dotted along the way, while a large number heads straight for the nearest ship docked in the Diemermeer, not far from where your boat is. Quickly, you are rowed forward, and you are told to get ready. You don't know what you're meant to be ready for. Then you are within earshot of the Guelderian fighters, and a man next to you starts shouting insults at them. They stand on the dike and start throwing things at you all. Missiles sail over your head, but a man on the boat next to you gets hit. Water dogs, you hear a Guelderian shout out, and others amongst him pick up the appellate and howl it out themselves, derisively spitting towards you and gesturing menacingly as if indicating that you are soon to hang. Water dogs! Water dogs! Your blood is up, and the hatred you feel in your guts for these Guelderian animals knows no bounds. You want to humiliate them. First catch us, you shout, then hang us. The men around you howl in laughter, prodding the fury of the attacking Guelderian force. The words you spoke seep out as a chant. First catch us, then hang us. First catch us, then hang us. The Guelderian charge towards the ship comes as you are scrambling from the boat up onto the dike, armed with your new battle cry. As you stand up and survey the scene before you, everything becomes a vague blur. A man is running, screaming towards you, some sort of hammer held aloft. You watch his arm extend out, ready to swing the hammer to strike thunder upon your head. You are not ready for this. There is nothing you can do. You close your eyes and you begin to pray. But all you can think is, this is how you die. Thunder comes. It's just not delivered to your head. A momentous clap at that moment from the heavens causes everybody to stop. You look at your assailant not a few feet away from you and see his eyes widen for the briefest moment before a cannonball smashes into his side, sending him flying from the dike. You realize that Amsterdam ships are firing at the Guelderians. The bombardment rallies the Amsterdam contingent, who push forward past the fortification and into the stalled Guelderian attack. The barking of a militiaman spurs you further down the dike. The Guelderians are faltering, and in many cases already hastening a retreat. You hear shouts that one of the huts nearby has Charles of Egmont himself bunkered up in it. The cannons aim that way, and the walls are riddled with holes. With a few bodies strewn across the damp earth, the enemy enacts a full retreat, dispersing in the direction of Weesp. Cheers go up amongst the Amsterdam fighters, and you take a deep breath for what feels like your first one since you can remember. You return to the city that afternoon and sleep more soundly than you have in years. You and your fellow Amsterdammers have successfully repulsed the Guelderians in this first confrontation, but the enemy armies are still safely ensconced in the towns of Weesp and Muiden. Over the next few weeks, you are placed in a rotation whereby you have to either take guard at the fortification at Apersloot or in the vessels in the water on either side of it. You spend many nights over the following weeks at the fortification, while on sentry doing your best to fight the urge to sleep, peering endlessly through the darkness at the water that sometimes faintly reflected the light of the stars above. Always trying to remain vigilant, listening out for the slightest unusual sound, any range of which might signal the enemy's approach. You pass the time by speaking to the others on guard about their lives. One night, a Frisian soldier is complaining loudly in his strange accent that the war between the lords Maximilian and Charles of Egmont has cost his family their livelihood, as their ships cannot sail on the Zuider Zee anymore. He mutters under his breath that both of these pompous men were as bad as each other, and that he couldn't care less who wins this war as long as their ships can get back out on the water as soon as possible. The commander of the fortification, Gerard van Meerdorp, walks in as the Frisian is making these comments and abruptly tells him that his duties are done for the night and that he is dismissed. As the Frisian soldier departs, van Meerdorp looks you in the eye and says, "Never once seen a smile from that chap. Not sure his heart is in it. Frisians, they're always so gruff. What?" He laughs jovially and you peer back into his eyes. But as you do, something strange happens. You blink and suddenly feel as though you are in a waking dream. Everything around you is foggy, like a mist has risen from the earth. Yet Van Meerdorp's face remains clear. His mouth is still moving. He is speaking. But though his mouth makes the shapes, it is not his voice that you hear. The voice you hear is coming from a distance, a vast distance you feel, one that transcends not just space, but time, like it is coming to you from a different world. You watch the mouth and try to listen to what the voice is saying, but what you hear is indecipherable. It's a different language, yet it is familiar. Ding, 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 ding. And I bet you didn't know that was Dutch. The modern English word gruff comes from the Middle Dutch word grof, meaning coarse or thick. Amazing, right? But don't get confused during this waking dream by the fact that this character is actually speaking Middle Dutch, and furthermore, has no idea what the word Dutch might mean. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. The voice trails off. You're very puzzled by all this and wish you could have understood what the voice was saying. You blink again and the hazy state ceases as quickly as it began. Van Meerop has walked away to tend to other affairs. The world appears as normal. A few days later, you come to learn that the Frisian soldier has been discharged from further service entirely, having been deemed as not loyal enough to the cause. The short night of the 24th of June is exceptionally dark, coming as it does shortly after midsummer. The waning crescent moon casts scant light as you sit on a ship gently bobbing around in the waters of the Diemermeer Lake. You listen to the sound of the waves lapping the boat and of horses grazing in the darkness on the dike. Their intermittent whinnies and the sound of their soft hooves in the grass has been an unexpectedly comforting companion to you and your fellow guards during these long nights on duty. In these early hours, it is difficult to see through the inky blackness, but you think you see a horse slowly walking towards the fortification in search of fresh grass. Suddenly, though, a blood-curdling scream comes echoing out across the water, followed by another. "What was that?" one of your companions on board asks, with panic in his voice. The answer becomes obvious as the sound of battle breaks out on the dike. "The Guelderians are attacking," somebody else shouts. The commander of your ship hastily orders you all to prepare to fire at the first sign of an enemy who might approach you by water. The soldiers at the cannons ask whether they should open fire on the dike already, but the commander tells them not to, since shooting blindly could cause more harm than good. You feel helpless as the sound of battle rages on throughout the night. Dawn breaks early and the gloom of twilight is pierced by the sun's golden rays. You all gaze intently at the fortification, trying to see whether or not it has been captured by the Guelderians. Soldiers are still fighting on the side of the fort which faces Amsterdam. Are they Amsterdammers or are they the enemy? You don't know. A few small empty boats lie on the edge of the dike and your stomach sinks. The enemy must have silently rowed past you through the darkness and attacked the fortification at its most vulnerable side. As feelings of guilt swirl around you for failing to spot the enemy, you see a head stick up above the parapet all of a sudden. It is Gerard van Meerop, the commander, who yells at the top of his lungs, "Burgundy! Burgundy! Hurrah! The fort has not been captured. Everybody on your ship swiftly swings into action and the ships immediately fire at the soldiers on the dike, knowing now that they are Guelderians. As the cannons roar, the enemy troops scramble for cover. Some try to run to the boats with which they had arrived at the dike, but quickly realize that this would just bring them closer into the range of your guns. Chaos ensues and the soldiers from Guelders turn and run, sprinting along the dike in the direction of Amsterdam. From the fort and the ships, the cheers and celebration ring loud. A few hours later, word comes from Amsterdam that the Guelderian soldiers had been intercepted by Reinier Mostert, who at first light had been leading a group of citizens out of the city towards the fortification to replace those of you on duty. They had found the exhausted soldiers from Guelders hiding in ditches and long grass along the route where they had immediately surrendered. You learn that the enemy have been taken back to Amsterdam as prisoners of war, except for one man who had bravely but futilely attempted to attack the Amsterdammers from his hiding place with a pike, only to be quickly killed himself. You learn with horror that the man was the Frisian soldier you had been stationed with at the fortification, who had been discharged from service. After leaving your ranks, he had defected to the enemy and provided them with all the information they had needed to launch this surprise attack. Despite this treachery, and you think to yourself, your failures, you and the other Amsterdammers managed to halt the Guelderians at Ypersloot for the second time in just a month. We will find out what happens next on the other side of this break. The mood within the city is buoyed when reports arrive that Charles of Egmont has departed from Weesp and returned eastward towards Guelders. With the inspirational leader of the enemy no longer present, the imminent threat of another attack on Amsterdam seems to have passed. The towns of Weesp and the castle at Muiden remain under the control of his soldiers, however, and it is decided that the best course of action now is to go on the offensive. From July, Weesp is put to siege by an army led by a man called Floris van Egmont, the Count of Buren, who is helped by a force from Amsterdam led by Reinier Mosterd. You remain in the city, eager to get to work rebuilding your business. In August, word arrives in Amsterdam that Emperor Maximilian is on his way from Leiden to personally lead the besiegement of Weesp. On the 20th of August, you notice a commotion and are somewhat bemused to see that all the nuns in a few nearby convents are standing at the windows looking impatiently out on the street. You ask a bystander what's going on, and he replies that Emperor Maximilian has ordered the nuns to greet him as he enters the city. Soon a herald's trumpet signals that the emperor is approaching. From afar you see him on horseback in splendid armor, waving at the crowd. Lord Maximilian, after entering the city, enters the convent of Bethany to offer them money and wine so that they might pray to the prosperity of his realm. That night, like every other night, you too pray, hoping for divine intervention that will stop this madness and return prosperity to your household. But the siege of Weesp continues as the summer fades into autumn. On the 15th of October, the eve of St. Gall's Day, a violent storm rages over Holland. You sit in your house, listening to the wind rattling the shutters on your windows and the rain clattering against the roof. Bells begin to ring out across the city, creating an ominous cacophony, warning that some kind of disaster is unfolding. A few minutes later, there is a banging at the door, and you open it to find your oldest son and his wife, their eyes wide with fear and their clothes soaked through. Through panting breaths, your son explains that the sea has risen, so much so that it has spilled over the dike and come pouring into the neighborhood in which they lived. Their house began to fill with water, so they escaped as quickly as possible with no time to try to save any of their possessions. You welcome them in and offer them shelter and dry clothes, a spot next to the fire, and together you spend the night praying as one, as the storm continues to unleash its fury. The next day, things have calmed down and you walk to your son's neighborhood to discover that his house, along with so many others, is uninhabitable. The storm has done great damage to the city and the surrounding countryside, with countless animals and people having drowned in the salt water. The tide was so great that a section of the dike between Amsterdam and Muiden actually collapsed, meaning that one could now sail across the meadows towards Weesp. A few days later, you discover that the people of Waterland, just north of Amsterdam, have actually concocted a plan to liberate Weesp by boat. But their proposal is rejected, as peace negotiations are apparently already underway to end the war with Guelders. In the first week of December, an order is pronounced from the Amsterdam Town Council to hold a solemn procession to seek peace and tranquility. You, your wife, and your children all join with the rest of the citizenry as you walk from De Plaats in the center of the town, over the cobbled streets, past the recently inundated houses which are already starting to be repaired, along the canals which this year have been so eerily silent, a consequence of the war grinding the business in the city to a halt. You think about the destruction of the Lestage, about how much rebuilding must be done there, about your fellow citizens who were killed in the Guelderian sneak attack on the fort, and about how close you came to having your skull cracked open in the first attack. Despite your best efforts to remain solemn, you can't help but weep at the overwhelming sense of helplessness in the face of it all. A few days later, however, and there is cause to celebrate. Word arrives in Amsterdam that the regent, Lady Margaret, has reached an agreement with the Archbishop of Rouen at Cambrai, which promises peace with Guelders. By the terms of the agreement, Charles of Egmont's forces must leave Weesp and the castle of Mouden within 14 days. The news is greeted across the city with cheers and celebration. There is dancing and people hugging each other in the streets. The constant feeling of dread which has accompanied you, sitting heavy on your shoulders for more than a year, suddenly feels lighter. It is lifting. Your nightly prayers for peace have finally been answered. It has been a tumultuous and dark year for you and for Amsterdam. But as the 1508th year of your Lord draws to a conclusion, the future finally appears to be a little bit brighter. Thanks for listening to History of the Netherlands. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through our Imaginarium as we took a tour through life in Amsterdam in 1508. Unfortunately for our friend, the caulker, the Treaty of Cambrai will only prove to be a temporary respite in the wars with Guelders. What a surprise. And the city of Amsterdam will face further attack from Charles of Egmont in 1512, during which the Lestage will again be burned to the ground. For now, however, the battlefield of European politics will switch theatres from the Low Countries to the other side of the Alps in Italy. A secret addition to the Treaty of Cambrai manages to bring the arch-enemies Maximilian and the French King Louis XII into an unexpected alliance against Venice. But all of that, and much more, is for future episodes of History of the Netherlands. For now, though, we would love to thank everyone who has taken the plunge and signed up to be a member of the Intercursus Magnus Patronus, a mutually beneficial trade agreement which you too can join at www.patreon.com/historyofthenetherlands. There you can back in our podcast financially with whatever amount of whatever currency you want. We will even take early 16th century Dutch stuifers. And in return, you will get episodes of History of the Netherlands ad-free before they appear on the regular feed. This show simply wouldn't be possible without all the amazing people who have done this. So please be like them and join the Intercursus Magnus Patronus. We will love you forever. Of those amazing people, we would particularly love to thank Dimitris Vazirakis Dimmer, we call him, the least sookiest Dimmer. And as it happens, easily our favorite Dimmer. Then, of course, there is longtime correspondent Zonja van der Velde, or as I'm sure was read out all too often in school classrooms in Australia as a child, Zonja van der Velde, an Australian with deep Dutch connections. She listens to this show to learn more about her family's heritage. Thanks for all the emails and your continued support, Fealty. Wales Christian, or perhaps it is Christian Wales. Christian Wales does sound like missionary work gone too far. Whatever it is, Walesy, thank you for your wonderful support as well. You can follow us on social media on Blue Sky or Instagram, or shoot us an email at info@republicofamsterdamradio.com. If you do have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. That's it for now. Until next time, doei. Thanks for listening to History of the Netherlands. You can get detailed show notes at our website, historyofthenetherlands.com. From there, you'll be able to find other podcasts and projects that we've created. This is a production of Republic of Amsterdam Radio.